Political militant Islam portal Islamic terrorism. Islamist terrorism or radical Islamic terrorism are terrorist acts against civilians committed by violent Islamists who have a religious motivation. The largest numbers of incidents and fatalities caused by Islamic terrorism have occurred in India, Iraq, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, and Mali. In 2015, 4 Islamic extremist groups were responsible for 74% of all deaths from Islamic terrorism: ISIS, Boko Haram, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda, according to the Global Terrorism Index 2016. Since approximately 2000, these incidents have occurred on a global scale, affecting not only Muslim-majority states in Africa and Asia, but also states with non-Muslim majority such as the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Spain, Belgium, Sweden, Russia, Australia, Canada, Sri Lanka, Israel, China, India and Philippines. Such attacks have targeted both Muslims and non-Muslims. However, the majority affect Muslims themselves. A study conducted by a French non-governmental organization found that 80% of terrorist victims are Muslims. In a number of the worst affected Muslim-majority regions, these terrorists have been met by armed, independent resistance groups, state actors and their proxies, and elsewhere by condemnation coming from prominent Islamic figures. Justifications given for attacks on civilians by Islamic extremist groups come from extreme interpretations of the Islamic holy books, the need to restore and purify Islam by establishing Sharia law, especially by restoring the caliphate as a pan-Islamic state, the glory and heavenly rewards of martyrdom, the supremacy of Islam over all other religions. Use of the phrase, Islamic terrorism, is disputed. In Western political speech it has variously been called counterproductive, highly politicized, intellectually contestable, and damaging to community relations. Others have condemned the refusal to use the term as an act of self-deception, full-blown censorship, and intellectual dishonesty. After the Al-Qaeda September 11 attacks, US President George W. Bush and UK Prime Minister Tony Blair repeatedly stated that the war against terrorism had nothing to do with Islam, but was a war against evil. Former US President Barack Obama explained why he used the term terrorism rather than Islamic terrorism in a 2016 town hall meeting, saying, "There is no doubt, terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda or ISIL, they have perverted and distorted and tried to claim the mantle of Islam for an excuse for basically barbarism and death. But what I have been careful about when I describe these issues is to make sure that we do not lump these murderers into the billion Muslims that exist around the world." Replacing the term with Islamist terrorism has been suggested as a way of distancing terrorism from Islam, while others inside and out of the Islamic world oppose its use, asserting there is no connection between Islam and terrorism. Some Muslim scholars assert that extremism within Islam goes back to the Kharijites who existed in the 7th century. From their essentially political position, they developed extreme doctrines that set them apart from both mainstream Sunni and Shia Muslims. The Kharijites were particularly noted for adopting a radical approach to takfir, whereby they declared that other Muslims were unbelievers and therefore worthy of death. After failed post-colonial attempts at state formation and the creation of Israel, a series of Marxist and anti-Western transformations and movements swept throughout the Arab and Islamic world. These movements were nationalist and revolutionary, not Islamic, but their view that terrorism could be effective in reaching their political goals generated the first phase of modern international terrorism. In the late 1960s, Palestinian secular movements such as Al-Fatah and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine began to target civilians outside the immediate arena of conflict. Following Israel's 1967 defeat of Arab forces, Palestinian leaders began to see that the Arab world was unable to militarily confront Israel. During the same time, lessons drawn from revolutionary movements in Latin America, North Africa, Southeast Asia and Palestine saw the Palestinians turn away from guerrilla warfare towards urban terrorism. These movements were secular in nature, but their international organization served to spread terrorist tactics worldwide. Religiously motivated groups grew after the failure of Arab nationalism in the Six-Day War against Israel. In the Middle East, Islamic movements came into conflict with secular nationalism. Islamic groups were supported by Saudi Arabia to counter nationalist ideology. According to Bruce Hoffman of RAND, in 1982 out of 64 terrorist groups were categorized as having religious motivation. In 1995 almost half were religiously motivated, with the majority having Islam as their guiding force.